applications open on the internet at the present. And certainly ask me any questions about that. And then later in the year, there'll be an event called IoT Media Map. So it's actually somewhat similar in theme to this, sort of this intersection of the Internet of Things and media. And that will be a very demo-oriented activity, and so we look forward to that. And then, of course, our annual summit, our giant gathering of all the universities we work with, all the companies we work with. This year, September 22nd, way up north at Columbia University, I saw Warren Herskowitz, who's on our board, and who's the Executive Director of Columbia Technology Ventures. He is kind enough to host us at Columbia this year, and we look forward to that. So I hope that you'll add that to your calendar. I'm going to invite up, before we get started, I'm going to invite up my colleague Amy Chin to say a very quick word about two new programs we've got, which are particularly keen for the faculty and the students in the room to pay attention to. Amy.
Great. So my name is Amy. I'm the Chief Project Manager here at NYC Media Lab. In my role, I'm the liaison between the corporate members and the universities who we match together for projects. So one of the programs that I wanted to bring up is actually a Connected Futures Research and Prototyping Challenge. We launched it at our summit, and generally it's a grant program. We are doing info sessions across the universities. Basically, we started last month and we're continuing this month. And basically, universities, teams have the opportunity to apply for up to $25,000 for funding for their research in 4 areas that we've defined. So the first area is virtual reality. The second is the connected home. The third is empowering citizen journalism. And the fourth is imagining the future without phones, without mobile phones. So as you can see, these 4 areas span media, tech, innovation, all the programs that we work with across the universities. So definitely let me know if you have any questions. I'm the lead on this program here from NYC Media Lab side. And then the next program I wanted to bring up quickly is NYC Media Lab Combine. This is a new program to encourage spin-off activity from the campuses. We know that a lot of our corporate members are interested in the startups that are incubating across the campuses that we work with. So this is an opportunity for our member companies to include mentors for the program. And this program, actually, we're accepting applications. The website here is thecombine.nyc. And applications are open. They due in December, and the program will kick off a lead launchpad type of boot camp for the teams that are selected in the spring. So that's the first phase, the market validation phase. All the teams will go through a program to let them know if their product has a market. There will be a go or no-go point following the program. So generally, it's the Connected Futures Challenge and the Combine that I wanted everyone to get a sense of today.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to jump right into it and get started here very quickly. Let me just say a word about the format. Essentially what we're going to do today is a series of presentations. So we're in a comfortable space. We are not going to have a break in the morning, but if you need a cup of coffee, get up and get a cup of coffee. I think it'll be okay. There are lots of little quiches, so stuff those into your pockets and come back to your seat. And each of these individual presentations, we're going to do 3 in a row and then follow that with Q&A. We had 2 other individuals that were on the program and who had to cancel on us, unfortunately. Alex Glorioso from Columbia and also Dakota Powell, who unfortunately was too deep into building a demo of her own to join us this morning. But I think it's worked out because I think we're just going to have enough time to get through everybody and give it enough time for a good discussion. And we're going to go straight into the first one. And I'm very excited to welcome Ken Perlin. The day is going to be bookended by 2 researchers in New York who have been working in this space for decades now and who are very important to this space. And I'm very excited about that. Ken is a professor in the Department of Computer Science at NYU. He directs the Games for Learning Institute. He's also a faculty member in what's called Magnet. For those of you who don't know, it's a transdisciplinary space at NYU School of Engineering in Brooklyn, and I encourage you all to see that. I think he may have just hosted a virtual reality Halloween party over the weekend, so maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that. Ken is going to speak and present on his research and his perspective on future reality for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to take Q&A, which I'll moderate. So start working on your questions, and I'll welcome Ken up, and we'll have to help him transition here quickly on the device.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so actually future reality was a phrase that my colleague at Emily Carr in Vancouver, Denise Quinnell, and I came up with while we were highly sleep deprived at SIGGRAPH, showing a big shared future reality experience, and we're trying to figure out what to call it. So, oh, that's not working?
It's not picking up enough, I think.
Okay.
Oh, that's for recording. The one in your hands will move.
Okay.
Hello, room.
I feel like singing lounge music. Channel writing of Bill Murray. So basically, the problem with virtual reality as a signifier is that it's being used for very specific commercial reasons that have a lot to do with people sitting down in a chair, putting something on it, using game controllers, and if you're doing research, you think about the longer term, and right now, what's going on right now is that we've got these things that there's lots of them here, and they're basically these bricks that you stick on your face, these big fat bricks, and but a lot of smart people, actually a lot of smart people with access to a lot of money and a lot of big companies are working on doing better. So in fact, maybe within the next 10 years, it's going to look more like this. And at that point, it's going to start looking a lot more like stuff people will walk around with socially. And it's become sort of like what happened when, we had Mosaic in 95, well, we had 93, but everyone started using it in 95. And then that progressed steadily, and then in 2007, suddenly we had the iPhone, and it was a huge jump because suddenly the web was in your pocket. So once these things start being thin films that start showing up, like on your eyeballs, at that point, it's going to just, and then eventually, who knows, in 30 years, implants, it's going to have a huge impact. So I want to talk about that. Like, what is that future going to be like? Well, at some point, this is going to be normal. We're just not going to think about, because we'll all see the same thing as we walk around in the street, and we'll say, okay, that's just part of reality. Just like when you look at a menu, there's nothing real about the menu except in our heads, because it's, you can't taste the printing, you can't smell it, you can't touch it, but we consider it real because we all share it within our brains. And then, not only that, but there'll be things like this. There'll be creatures that will float around in the world. And, oh, I need a clock that I can see. And then, so we're starting to prototype this by figuring out how can we create alternate spaces that people can share physically moving around. And that's the key, is physically moving around. So we're not going for the highest quality visuals. We're going for the least annoying form factor. And the greatest opportunity, therefore, to understand what the social situation is as people are hanging out in their everyday lives. Okay, so we call this prototyping the future because we're hoping that what's going to happen here is that we're going to be able to figure out what it's going to be like when people just are hanging out in the future together. So I had an awakening when on September 2014, I put one of these on for the first time here, VR. You're all familiar with it, and of course it's much, much better than cardboard because it has a separate IMU, so when you turn your head, it's completely believable that you're looking around. And the moment I looked in this, I thought to myself, the first thought I had is I need to buy one of these. So I went out and bought one of those. Went out and bought a motion capture lab so that we could put people together in the motion capture lab, because now we had an opportunity to give a super lightweight form factor. And these heroic grad students, Connor and Zach, who spent weeks and weeks figuring out the best way that you could use commercial routers and commercial software so that we could multicast Wi-Fi back to these things on unbroken Android phones, and they managed to do it. And then at SIGGRAPH, we ended up showing this huge thing to hundreds of people, which we called HoloJam. I could show you a little bit of that. The basic idea there was that people were just walking around in this space, and this huge space. Let's see if the audio is going to work. I guess we'll find out. Hold on. So this was an experience that about, oh, I don't know, 300 or 400 people experienced at SIGGRAPH. This is our test back at NYU, where this is what it looks like if you're wearing this thing. This is actually back in Broadway, and hopefully some of you will come by and visit and see what we're doing. And notice it's very, very lightweight, and I'll skip forward here because they're a very short talk. Kids really get into it. And they're seeing this shared world, they're seeing each other as avatars, and they're all drawing things together. At SIGGRAPH, we had people basically making one giant, coherent, multi-person artwork today.
Okay, lower your arms, jump up in the air, lift one leg, lift the other leg.
And that's kind of what it felt like to people in the space. So that was cool, and then we started doing some crazy stuff. And we started doing things like, hey, what happens if we change the scale? So here, this is an experiment that we did just last month. Hopefully, my internet is working. I need to turn on my internet. Okay. So you're looking at a monitor, and what you're seeing on that monitor is what somebody is seeing who's wearing a Valve HTC Vive headset. And they're looking at a virtual reality that's actually happening on another room. And to them, it looks like they're just looking down at a table, and all the people in the other room are in miniature. So that's Zhu, one of our PhD students. And so now we're going to take you across the hall, and you're going to see there's somebody moving around a physical table with a marker on it, and there's someone wearing this stuff, and the person who's wearing this thing looks like a little doll-sized person. And this was because we got a lot of feedback at SIGGRAPH from people who said, hey, can we do production with this? From Hollywood directors, from effects animators at Disney. And so we said, why don't we just create two different experiences, one where everyone's walking around, another where somebody can be the set designer, the lighting designer, the choreographer, and they can make very large gestures that look down into space. So there was that idea. So that was really great. And then we said, what do we do next? Well, Halloween actually is kind of boring and laid out. So we decided, and the parade sucks now, ever since they brought the TV cameras in. How many people remember when it was still good? Right? Yes. Never coming back. So we decided that we would do something more interesting. We decided we would do a Day of the Dead celebration, inspired by the Mexican Day of the Dead. Because it's happy, it's fun, it's festive, the spirits get remembered, they're happy and we're happy. And you basically play a character, a spirit in the spirit world, and you're interacting with everything. And when you're in the experience, it's completely overwhelming. There's music playing, there's skeletons dancing and cheering you on. It's hard to explain, but so we cut together a video which doesn't substitute for the real thing, but it gives you some sense of the flavor of it. So those black creatures with the white masks that look like refugees from Miyazaki film, those are the other people in the room. Fan that you see blowing, that becomes this weird thing that when you walk up to it, it's a creature that blows air at you. And that's a xylophone. It's a giant 25-foot skeleton. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cooler than people walking around wearing Richard Nixon masks? Just saying. So we did, and also we had another room next door where people wearing the Vive could play the God. And when you looked up in the sky, you saw this giant creature, and when you were in the Vive, you saw everything you just saw in miniature on a table, and they could make forces happen, swarms of birds and things fly through. So it was great fun for everybody. But we're thinking, we have this near-term problem now that we want to do things like this, of course, because we have VR. And all of the current VR, there's the big three that are coming out. Sony is coming out with the Morpheus. So this is going to be just a little, because Justin has to talk about near-term and longer-term. So some of the near-term, they're coming out with the Morpheus sometime in the first half of 2016. And Valve HTC is coming with the Vive. These are typical users. Here, for example, is a typical user of Facebook's Oculus. And so they're all coming out with the same thing, which is I've got the headset that's tracked and I've got the hands that are tracked, but we have no idea where the feet are. So fortunately, we created a technology in our lab that now somebody's commercializing, which is actually turns anything under your feet with fairly inexpensive floor mats into foot pressure. So we're trying to figure out how to integrate that in the experience and now here's Action Shot. That's me in VR, looking very, very cool. And here's the thing, is that part of the key of our hologram thing is that if you have a head and you have two hands and you have feet, this is a motion capture of our PhD student Connor, and all we have to start with is the tracking of his head and his two hands and his feet. But from that, you can say, oh, well, I can add elbows and knees because I know where those are since I have position orientation. And then on top of that, I could start adding a skeleton. And then from that, I could build entire avatars. That's important for shared virtual reality because all you need to do is add the feet. And if you add the feet, you can see each other, and it starts becoming sort of a commercial, sort of a shared social experience. And then you're moving beyond let's shoot things into let's hang out with each other. And so what we'd like to do to make that happen is turn things like that floor mat into something that looks like this. And basically that's a software effort, because once you can take the foot pressure and make it look like the 14 buttons plus 2 triggers plus 4 degrees of freedom of XY joysticks, then you can start saying, hey, different people have different applications, and it takes care of what's underneath you in a different way. So that opens up the opportunities for what you can do with a more socially oriented virtual reality. Meanwhile, I'm going to sort of wrap up here. The last thing I'm going to talk about is my interest in research, because again, Justin said talk about short-term and the long-term. That was the short-term immediate. Now this is the long-term. I think that in 30 years from now, maybe even 20 years from now, after everybody's got this stuff, and everyone here knows a 1-year-old who pinches to zoom on everything, because that's what you do these days. And so that's going to happen. That things floating in the air as a normal part of reality is going to be the reality that kids will grow up with sometime the next few decades, which means that when they communicate with each other, their language will evolve. And I'm actually really interested in that evolution of language. So we're designing this system. I'm using it right now. Everyone's only seen me drawing things like come to life. It's called Chalk Talk, which we're putting into our shared virtual reality spaces. And the idea of Chalk Talk is to try to understand the beginnings of what would it be like to have a shared language. For example, if you and I are talking, and I want to talk about some sort of creature, all I have to do is draw the creature, and that should become part of our discourse and float in the air between us. Or if I want to explain something to you like, this is how pendulums work, then that should become an operation pendulum, and I should be able to say things like, hey, I can actually ask questions about, well, suppose I wanted to ask questions about the behavior of that pendulum. I could just wire things up as a visual language while I'm talking to you. And I think that kind of easy sort of conversation between people is going to kind of change the way we think about this stuff. So right now, we're sort of at a 0 with VR, but we want to kind of move up and up and up and higher and higher. Actually, if we go down, I guess it reminds me of this. So I'm going to do some fun stuff, because I just saw The Martian, and so I was inspired. I just had to do this. Look, I'm Matt Damon. Right. But the worlds that we're talking about are actually worlds that we create. They're computer graphic worlds. So right now we have the capability. This is running on my GPU. This is just basically a fragment shader. So you can take this fragment shader, that's actually the code for the fragment shader, and I can change it now because it's just a little live coding. But the key thing is that we're going to be able to do this conversationally. We're able to open up objects, change their behavior, and talk about them. And so the social implications of people being able to, but of course not everyone's going to want to use code. A lot of people want to create things visually. So why not have gestures for creating things visually? Like maybe that's the gesture of a potter's wheel. So I want to create an object block and say, you know, I think I want to design some dishware. I'm just going to create the profile for it, and that should just happen right in the air between us. In fact, in the software, I just created that just now, and of course, in the future, you should be able to say, well, just send that to a 3D printer or give a material, but then you might be talking to me, and you might say, Ken, that was really nice, but I have a different idea about what that's doing. So you make a gesture in the air, and you say, well, I've got a particular profile curve, and I want to apply it to your object, and then you start doing some live editing, which is actually what we're doing now, and we start like having this conversation where, let's make this thing, let's change it, blah, blah, blah. And now, what's interesting about this is that what happens when you start doing things like that is you start creating general purpose tools and the general purpose vocabulary. So the idea of being able to make a curve transcends the idea of, oh, I'm only using the curve to make a 3D object. I might look at your curve and I can say, I really like your 3D curve, but maybe I have a different idea for how to use that 3D curve. There's this animation I've been thinking of making. And I've been thinking of having my little animated characters move in some kind of path. So why don't I take your curve and use it to animate my little character, and then we start editing that path, and the character starts changing and doing things differently. So I'm thinking that this is kind of a much more exciting way to think about things. And I think it has implications for lots of applications. Like, for example, the Internet of Things. We talk about physical objects. You know, so here's a physical object that exists in our actual space, and you know, everybody knows that a light bulb is really a transducer that transduces electric current into light. But we can talk about that visually in our conversations with each other. Somebody might have a cool invention, like they might want to say, you know, as long as we're dealing with objects, I could just mount a camera to the entrance of the room where I have this light, and I want to explain to you that I'm going to make that responsive. So, and this, by the way, this is the only part of the talk, just so you know, that involves hand waving. All right, there's the hand. And so I say, I want it so when somebody waves their hand over this, the light turns on, the light turns off. Wouldn't it be great if we could describe those inventions to each other in these very, very intuitive ways? Now, my real interest in all this stuff, seriously, is not any of this. My interest is, I'm really interested in the arts, and I'm interested in that creature that was sitting on your hand. So I'm interested in things like, I want to make a creature that has some personality, and I want people to interact with those creatures. Why shouldn't people just be able to draw that creature? And then we're interested in animated characters. Sometimes they're interested in us, like this guy here is like really fascinated by my cursor. He's also, by the way, he's also very ticklish. And sometimes they just leave us. So to sum up, I think that once we actually have these powerful capabilities of making virtual creatures, and those creatures are tied in with our language, and we're able to talk to those creatures, and they're able to talk back to us, and we just invoke them the way Harry Potter draws things, by drawing them in the air. Like, I'm just going to show you a little behind the scenes. This guy actually has a little AI in it. His AI is that he says, I'm looking for anything that says it's a light, and I'm going to fly toward that. So now he's just flying freely, but in fact, the last thing I guess I'll draw in my talk is I'm going to give him something to be interested in. So we're going to make something that actually has the property, and again, I'll open up behind the scenes and show you a little bit of the artificial intelligence that's working here. This guy says, I am a light. Because he is a light, you'll notice that the flying creature moves toward him, and if I move him, that starts moving with it. And of course, if I get rid of it, then it sets him free again. So, speaking of setting free, once we have the ability to extend the language that children can use to communicate with each other, that is a power-up bigger than VR and bigger than computers themselves. That fundamentally changes the way that we communicate with each other. And language is, after all, the big original power-up that makes us human. So I'm kind of interested in helping to make that future. And if anybody wants to make it with me, just talk to me afterward. Thank you.
We've got time for a few questions from the floor before we move into our first cohort presentation. Yes, sir.
So, great presentation.
Thank you. Great audience.
So you're talking about, in this case, it seems like what's most interesting is the very quick evolution once we get to a certain stage of acceptance where people are essentially building, not just participating in virtual worlds, but quickly building and evolving them. And I mean, for me, even though you're using butterflies and candles, the natural progression of this would be to quickly go into a purely sort of artificial native universe, where the creations are completely divorced from any kind of physical
Right, and you're
analog.
seeing a little bit of that, for example, with Minecraft, where you have an alternate world that has a different physics, and little kids are embracing that alternate physics because it gives them power for creating and expressing to each other that they don't get in the physical world. So I completely agree with you. I think, though, until you build those communities, it's hard to know what people will build. So I think our goal is, I mean, the candle and the moth were really just, because everybody knows what those are, so I could tell that story. But I completely agree that we need to hand this over to a community of creators and see what they will do.
Right here.
I kind of want to elaborate on his question and respond to what you said, because we already had that community. It was called Second Life, and now it's a wasteland. So does that mean that we are constantly moving and evolving and leaving behind those communities? So what keeps us in the interest of the new, or really the sense of community?
I think that it's an unfair comparison, because I think Second Life was an attempt to say, what will it be like? What is the right soil to build this in? And I don't think it was a successful attempt. I think Minecraft was a successful attempt. I think World of Warcraft was a successful attempt. I think the web was a successful attempt. I think Twitter and Facebook are successful attempts. People try all kinds of things. Some things, like Second Life, is sort of like there's a lot of excitement, but there's something not quite right about them, because they're not optimizing the right kind of communication between people, and that's okay. It's great that people experiment. So we can always point to, if we say search engines failed because look at Alta Vista, but actually one actually succeeded. And if you're Microsoft, you would argue that two succeeded. So, just in case there are any potential funders from Microsoft here, So I think it's not like let's not ask the question. It's like let's let 1,000 flowers bloom, and then there will be some successes, but we don't know what they are yet until we understand the new medium. And just this sort of philosophical point about that. The people who made the best films back 100-something years ago were not the people who came from theater. And the people who are going to make the best VR are not the people who come from Hollywood. You can't just transpose the ideas from the earlier media. It has to be learned by doing.
Another question. Right here in the front.
The fact that kids are growing up with the internet and these devices and are already pinching to zoom on objects is a little scary, but not necessarily a bad thing. But if all of a sudden they can just create things that don't actually exist and send them into the world, how are we going to figure out what that's going to do to developmental psychology and change the entire world?
Every time someone does something like writing or publishing or movies or the web or television, every single time, or even automobiles that go faster than 30 miles an hour, because some people were assumed 100 years ago that would kill you. Then there's always these people saying, what will that do to us? But in fact, we do send virtual things out into the world. We do it all the time. And one of the great things actually about the web is the fact that people can write something and self-publish. So the idea of sending virtual things out into the world is actually our bread and butter. It's what we do. It's being human. So this is nothing fundamental. This is something we're very used to. It's just a new modality, and so people at first might be confused and not realize how much it has in common with what we've been doing all along.
I think we'll leave it there, Ken.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.